Okay, we are live. Just going to let people connect. Welcome to those just joining. Great, we can see people coming in. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds and then we'll make a start. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to session 5. This is going to be around building blocks to a resilient food system. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before I pass over to the panel here. We encourage use of the chat and Q&A functions. I'm sure you're all very used to that by now, but please do message in there where you are watching from, and any questions throughout, they can be answered either during or at the end of this. So we also have interpretation into French or English if there's a French speaker, but also into sign language as well. Just need to press the interpretation button at the bottom there. So, Alyssa, I'll hand over to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luke. Nisambula Vinaka, bonjour and good afternoon. Welcome to the session, which, as Luke mentioned, is called the Building Blocks to a Resilient Food System. Just quickly, by way of background, this session brings together the diverse stakeholders in strengthening food resilience to really demonstrate the building blocks that's needed to, one, facilitate collaboration, two, is to drive investments, and to enable the mainstreaming of disaster, climate, and food. The 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, which our leaders had endorsed, calls for a resilient Pacific region of peace, harmony, security, social inclusion, and prosperity that ensures all Pacific people can lead free, healthy, and productive lives. Of course, a huge part of this resilience effort lies in our resources, the Blue Pacific continent and our terrestrial resources, both for our food and our livelihoods, and of course, both of which are intrinsically linked to our Pacific identities, our cultures, and our economies, and houses the Pacific Coastal Food System, as well as our indigenous food systems. And of course, both of these are crucial in building community resilience. We have 4 amazing speakers today representing the diverse stakeholder group in food systems and in resilience, who will share about this and a whole lot more, and in 60 minutes. So I told you they were amazing. So we're going to do this in an hour. If I may quickly introduce them, then we'll start our Talanoa session about the said building blocks. We've got Philippe, who is from French Polynesia. I think he's going to join shortly. He's a food systems champion. And this has really manifested over the years because he's been in different positions in the French Polynesia administration, particularly in agriculture and rural development. He currently serves as the Director for Agriculture and has led the work to develop the Agriculture Master Plan in French Polynesia. He is committed to the agroecological transition of Polynesian agriculture and the development of a food transition plan. And he's especially keen to support areas where this brings about healthier outcomes. Dora, who will be next up, is a current PhD candidate on food systems at the University of Wollongong in Australia. Her research examines sector-specific policy objectives for ensuring food nutrition security, as well as looking at governance structure, particularly in Vanuatu, and how all of this is really crucial and important elements when we're talking about building resilience from a systems perspective. Michaela has over 20 years of experience in international development, particularly in livelihoods, and this has included providing technical support and managing projects focused on agricultural innovation systems, value chains, both in agriculture and fisheries, gender integration, and climate adaptation. And last but definitely not the least is Minoru, who's based in Tonga, and he's the managing director of Nishi Trading Company, which is a private entity in Tonga, a company that's into commercial farming and has been in the importing and exporting of fresh produce for over 40 years. Minoru also works quite extensively at the national and regional level, sitting on boards, and various organizations. And he represents also today the Pacific Farmers Network, PIFON, and he's a strong advocate of how to involve farming communities and private sector, particularly in national and regional food systems. So before I start with I think I'll start with Dora because I don't see Philippe online yet. So I'll start with Dora. And really, as Luke had mentioned, I'll put the questions, if any questions come from the floor, right at the very end after the last person has spoken. So if I may, Dora, I'll start with you since Philippe hasn't joined us yet. If you can tell us a bit about your PhD on Vanuatu food systems governance to improve food security and health outcomes. How is this, the research and collaboration element particularly, and the context of your study, crucial in underpinning resilience in Vanuatu's food systems? How can this also translate to regional learnings?
Thank you, Alicia and team, for the opportunity, and greetings from Vanuatu. The research topic, the title is Vanuatu Food System Governance. So looking at the status and opportunities to transform and improve food security and health outcomes. This research is part of the food system project at the University of Wollongong, funded by the ACIAR. The study aims to better understand Vanuatu's existing food system governance, and more specifically to identify strengths and constraints, and hope to provide opportunities that could help improve the food system governance in Vanuatu. In this process, I look at the current policy, sector policy incoherence over 7 ministries, 13 policies in Vanuatu, the objectives, policy objectives that are relevant to food and nutrition security. And also I look at how institutions strengthening could be a place that help support the implementations of policy. The third component is taking a step back and try to understand what food system looks like in the 70s to the 80s, shortly after our independence from the dual colonial powers, and how that has had some influence in how policy priorities are set in agriculture, particularly the primary sector policies. Some of the potential, some of the findings that came about builds around some of the challenges that Vanuatu currently faces. Just generally, the limitations to understand the nutrient values of our local food. And this is important in terms of data collection and how data inform policy setting agendas. The other thing is just, I think, and this may be general in terms of our Pacific Island diverse, having access to market poor infrastructure. And you may agree if I have to say food security is not the problem of production. I think problem of distribution, access to market, and that also influence the limitations for the populations to adapt to the different events that climate change and political instability and all that influence how we make decisions on what food we decide for individual consumptions. I looked also at how different policy instruments like the subsidies that speaks to the needs of the people and how it influenced the policy as well. Some of the policy challenges, the content that I review, there's obvious limitation in terms of translating needs into policy agenda, and also aligning policy that are relevant, objectives that are relevant to food across different sectors. And these are some of the challenges that influence how policy objectives are decided. The absence of collective policy priority setting and implementation. The metrics or implementation plan is very loosely done across sectors in terms of listing sectors to support the implementation of the project, but I think there is a lack of a robust mechanism to hold actors accountable. In terms of the historical aspect and some of the issues, the policy around agriculture, for instance, I think in terms of agriculture policy, there's still a focus on cash commodities. And although there are few potentials for root crops, vegetable, it seemed to just focus more on certain produce that have potentials for export and tourism industry, and not so much for domestic consumptions. And I'll end, I think that's what I can say about some of the findings, but I think one of the recommendations that I am putting forward would be the national sectors to collaborate well with the private sectors. I think this is where the limitation is. There is very limited, we don't tap a lot into the private sectors that do have the resource to support the policy implementations. And the government, the national government need to look at the arrangements, institutional arrangement, and strengthen because there's perceptions about how external partners influence the government roles in policies. And I think we need to look at how national systems are strengthened so they have the capacity to adapt to the different external expectations. And I think that is important given the resources are limited and there's a lot of working in silos across the sectors. And in order to make sure, to ensure policy coherence across sectors, I think institution plays an important role in that, to accommodate NGOs, CSOs, private sectors, and the government sectors. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dora. I was going to reflect on just one point, but you raised quite a few good ones throughout that intervention. I think the history and that whole links to, pre-colonial days or, during colonial times, I think that has a lot of impact and really an interesting part to the conversation when we're looking at even resilience. What do we learn from in what we've done in the past? I think the whole agri-tourism versus domestic consumption, where is it that we can leverage off, these massive industries and massive sectors like agri-tourism to address those food systems deficiencies around building resilience. So thank you really for this really informative intervention. And hopefully that has prompted those listening in to maybe formulate some questions or make some commentary later on today. I'll move on to Michaela now. Michaela, thank you for joining us today. Can you just tell us a bit about some of the regional work that you're doing in CSIRO, particularly in livelihoods and adaptive environments, and how this demonstrates its role in building a resilient food system? What would you say have been crucial elements in enabling these? So as you're citing these examples of the work that you're doing, what have been the crucial, building blocks or elements to enable these to to work well in these countries or places that you're working?
So thanks, Elise, for the opportunity to be in this forum. And it's lovely to see you again. Elise and I worked together the whole of last week, but it's really nice to see you again online. So I work for the Commonwealth Scientific, Industrial and Research Organization. So I'm going to talk from a specific kind of lens, which is from almost like a applied research lens. CSIRO has been working for a long time in livelihoods and adaptive environments, and we work at multiple levels and multiple scales, and we work across the Asia-Pacific region. I've been at CSIRO for 10 years, and this has been a core part of my work. when we're looking at adaptation and resilience and how that impacts on livelihoods, we take a wide perspective. So often the debate ends up being around climate adaptation and resilience, but there are so many what we would call disruptors to the system that are impacting on the ability for the food system to be resilient and to be adaptive. And some of these are things like markets and financial shocks like we're seeing at the moment. Pandemics like COVID was a major disruptor to the food system, and some of the animal diseases that are emerging across the whole Asia Pacific region, like African swine fever, some of the pests and diseases, and even things that are not just within our region, things like the Ukrainian war. And who knows how it's going to play out now with what's happening with the kind of fighting that's started to happen with Israel and Palestine. So we are a global world, and there are shocks that can impact the whole region. So when we start to think about disruptors, we try to take a systems perspective and try to think about across a value chain or across a system how those disruptors impact on the food system. But really, that sounds like very theoretical. What do you mean? So I'm just going to give you an example of a project we worked on in Indonesia. And I thought Indonesia was a good example because it is an island nation. It is very dispersed. It has many of the issues that Polynesia, the Pacific has in terms of creating a resilient and adaptive food system. So we worked on a project which looked at maize, mung bean, cassava, shallots, dairy, pigs, and beef. And we worked, a key part of that was getting research to farmers, but making sure that there were really strong partnerships developed with the private sector and the farmers and the research. So one of my key roles was to develop these partnerships, to actually create them. And what was so crucial about that in terms of strengthening the resilience was the ability of people to start to talk to each other and understand each other's different needs. Private sector has very different drivers from researchers. Researchers often take forever to develop things. The products are often not relevant for farmers. They're not relevant for private sector. So creating those partnerships that actually strengthen that ability to talk to each other, but then also having private sector understand what some of the challenges are for researchers and what some of the kind of things that they need to do for their careers and for their systems is really important. We worked with companies like Syngenta and Nestle, so big companies, but we also worked with all the way down from national companies down to small, tiny SMEs, which were almost like cooperatives, women's processing groups, down to individual family businesses. And the aim was to really enhance their livelihoods, increase their incomes. And over the course of 5 years, we worked with 11,000 farmers and increased their incomes by between 30 and 200%. It was really about strengthening the cooperation across the value chain and across the kind of what I call the food systems ecosystem, for people to work better together. Closely linked to this is we helped universities set up innovation centers. So this was getting universities to be much more proactive about having an open face, outward-looking open face towards community, towards the private sector, and to start to have that two-way dialogue. And then finally, we worked at a national level with the government about changing the policy. So I think this speaks to quite a lot of the things that Dora has already touched on. It's about that cross-sectoral collaboration. It's about creating networks and strengthening networks for collaboration. It's about breaking down silos within ministries, because we also, even though we work with one primary ministry, we also work with the Ministry of Agriculture, and we worked with the Ministry of Finance as well. So really breaking down those silos which across the different sectors. And and then really focusing on co-developing solutions. I think what's really important in all of these food system projects is really to have a systems thinking approach and not to come at it with one solution, but to come at it with multiple approaches. You have to come in with listening ears and learning and the ability to adapt as you go and as you move along. So we've taken some of these learnings into Vietnam, where we're working on a project, and we've taken these learnings into a new program that we've developed, which is the Pacific Food Partnership, which some of you know about, which I presented on in the Pacific last week. So I think those are my main lessons, but very much touching on what Dora said. Livelihoods is broad. Livelihoods is for everybody. It's about how everybody in the system is able to generate living incomes and to have a life that is sustainable and resilient, and that can adapt as multiple disruptors hit them. So thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. And I mean, it's good to for you to show that link between the, the science part and academia, but also the strong collaboration with, with entities on the ground, which, I mean, you, like Dora, have also mentioned private sector. So you're the second speaker that have done so. So I think that perhaps presents a lot of scope and opportunities when we're talking about not just food systems in the broad context, but around the resilience component. And I like that you're throwing in the word disruptions, because obviously I think when we're looking at systems, thinking particularly, it's not business as usual. A lot of that is really grounded in where is it that we can raise the heat, do things a bit differently. So disruptions in this instance is not a bad word. I mean, obviously we're mindful that when we're talking about resilience, it's obviously shocks and disasters and, the not so great things that happen in our economies and the countries. But in terms of addressing and presenting solutions, I think we can use the word disruptions in a more positive spin. Whilst we're waiting for Philippe to join, he's having trouble coming online with the Zoom, but we'll move on to, oh, there he is, Philippe. Bonjour, Philippe. I will invite Philippe now to join us. And as I introduced Philippe already earlier on about his role in the French Polynesia administration as Director of Agriculture, and I'd like to invite him now to give his sharing and perspective on a question which I'll pose to him, which, bonjour, Philippe. And the question for you is, a resilient food system means being able to respond to shocks and different types of crises. And before us in the region is the health and non-communicable disease crisis. And can you share with us French Polynesia's focus in addressing this resilient human capital issue via transforming food systems? And secondly, also last week, which Michaela had mentioned earlier, is that Tahiti or French Polynesia had hosted a food systems workshop. And what was one big takeaway message or collective agreement from that event for having a resilient food system in French Polynesia? What came out quite strongly from that workshop that you think could be widely shared to this meeting today? Thank you.
Oui, bonjour tout le monde. Merci d'avoir finalement permis que je puisse me joindre à vous avec quelques petits problèmes techniques qui heureusement sont résolus. Donc il y a deux questions, si j'ai bien compris. Alors la réaction que la Polynésie a mis en œuvre à la crise Covid, même si c'était une préoccupation qui commençait à se faire jour depuis quelques années, comme dans tous les pays du monde, et initiée en ce sens par la FAO et aussi par la CPS, qui nous a poussé pour réfléchir sur nos systèmes alimentaires, la Polynésie française a vraiment décidé, en plein cœur de la crise Covid, d'élaborer un plan de transition alimentaire sur au moins 10 ans pour véritablement changer les choses. On a réalisé, toute la société polynésienne, tous les élus politiques de tous bords confondus, ont compris que continuer dans le même sens était vraiment pas possible. Il y avait 4 raisons principales. Hein. Première raison principale, c'est un enjeu effectivement de santé publique. 70% des gens sont en surpoids, 40% d'obésité, et la crise Covid a mis l'accent de manière très cruelle sur les dégâts que peuvent causer et les souffrances que peuvent causer l'obésité pour la santé des populations. Le deuxième enjeu, c'est un enjeu de sécurité alimentaire, vraiment au sens propre. Là aussi, la crise Covid a montré que les chaînes d'approvisionnement donc dépendaient beaucoup, les pays insulaires, dont la Polynésie. Plus de 70% de notre alimentation est importée. Donc, on est beaucoup trop dépendant de l'extérieur pour nous nourrir. Et en cas de rupture de ces chaînes d'approvisionnement, ce qui est toujours possible, malheureusement, et qui risque d'arriver de manière beaucoup plus dramatique que lors de la crise Covid, on serait véritablement dans de très, très grosses difficultés. Donc, deuxième enjeu, un enjeu de sécurité alimentaire, et un troisième enjeu, l'enjeu environnemental, puisque notre alimentation, la manière dont on mange, impacte beaucoup finalement le coût carbone des sociétés. L'impact environnemental de notre alimentation est important et il faut le réduire. Je pourrais rajouter un quatrième enjeu, qui est aussi un enjeu financier de politique publique. Nos maladies nous coûtent très cher. La collectivité qui doit financer le système social dépense en Polynésie des sommes extrêmement importantes. On est à 20 milliards, 20 milliards de francs pacifiques. Ça fait à peu près 20 millions d'euros. Donc voilà, tout ça a incité la Polynésie à faire un plan de transition alimentaire. Alors c'est quoi un plan de transition alimentaire? Ce sont des mesures très coordonnées entre tous les secteurs. Et c'est la difficulté de ce genre de plan, c'est qu'il faut coordonner à la fois la direction de la santé, l'éducation, les services économiques, l'agriculture, bien évidemment, les ressources marines, et tous aller dans le même sens en mettant l'alimentation au centre des réflexions. Alors, je ne vais pas vous expliciter notre plan de transition alimentaire, parce que là, j'aurais besoin encore de 10 minutes supplémentaires, et je crois que le temps est quand même relativement imparti. Donc voilà un petit peu la réaction qu'a eu la Polynésie, et on a eu la chance de pouvoir réaliser ce plan, puisqu'il est terminé aujourd'hui. Il va être approuvé par l'Assemblée de Polynésie d'ici un mois ou deux, pour pouvoir... alors, il s'agit, juste un mot quand même, on a déjà des mesures qui vont dans le bon sens. Donc, ces mesures qui vont sur 90 actions qu'on a mis en place, à peu près 20-25 sont déjà des mesures existantes qu'il faut renforcer. Et on a imaginé 80, à peu près 60 actions nouvelles qu'il faudra mettre en place pour atteindre nos objectifs dans 10 ans. Mais les objectifs en termes de santé publique, c'est souvent l'affaire d'une génération. 10 ans, on sera à peine à la moitié. Il faudra poursuivre encore 10 ans plus. Voilà pour la réponse à la première question. Sur la deuxième interrogation, sur ce qui se dégage de l'atelier, là aussi, on pourrait, surtout qu'on est encore à chaud, hein, c'est terminé à peine vendredi, donc moi j'ai envie de retenir une chose. Je ne sais pas si d'autres qui vont participer à l'atelier retiendront certainement d'autres éléments. Moi j'en ai retenu un qui a été repris dans le discours de clôture de notre ministre, qui est l'importance des farines de nos produits vivriers. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut véritablement utiliser beaucoup plus nos produits locaux dans notre alimentation. Et parmi ces produits locaux, ceux qui sont aujourd'hui beaucoup trop inutilisés, qui ne sont pas suffisamment dans les assiettes, même s'ils gardent une grande importance culturelle, même s'ils sont toujours présents dans les familles, parce que les Polynésiens, les gens du Pacifique ne vont pas mettre de côté la banane, le taro, le houlou, mais ce n'est pas suffisant. C'est à peine, même pas 10% au niveau calorique de notre consommation. Donc, il faut que ça soit beaucoup plus présent. Pour ce faire, il faut véritablement qu'on mette en place des filières de production de farine de production vivrier, pour pouvoir vraiment rivaliser avec les farines de céréales et tous les produits à base de céréales. Il y a un gros potentiel pour le moment qui reste à faire. Il faut comprendre ça sur l'échelle des 50, voire des 100 dernières années. C'est des tendances très, très longues aujourd'hui qui nous amènent à la situation d'aujourd'hui. Si aujourd'hui, les gens du Pacifique consomment des farines de céréales ou du pain tous les jours, à tous les repas et en quantité extrêmement importante. Un pain qui est vendu moins cher qu'à Paris, 60 francs CP la baguette de pain. Si on arrive à cette situation-là, c'est des tendances très très longues, c'est des politiques agricoles des pays riches qui nous mènent à cette situation. Donc il faut inverser la tendance à partir de nos céréales, de nos farines. Il faut que l'on fasse des farines de banane, des farines de houblon, des farines de manioc et qu'on incorpore ces farines dans nos produits en ayant bien sûr une action sur les prix. Le levier essentiel, c'est le prix. C'est ce qui rend les choses extrêmement difficiles. Ce sont des mécanismes extrêmement complexes de soutien, de tarification aux frontières, de subventions aux agricultures des pays les plus développés qu'il faut inverser. Donc voilà, j'ai peut-être été un peu long, mais ce sont des sujets qui sont compliqués.
Thank you so much, Philippe, for that intervention. In fact, there was, I think, those that are listening in can really relate to, all the, particularly the 4 elements that you raised around, the public health issue that's confronting French Polynesia, but really confronting the whole region, the food security elements and the environment. I think that's something we want to, bring to the fore is as we're looking at all these systematic elements in food systems in Brazilian, there's a big role or there's a big part that sits within the environmental element. And of course, using more local products. And I think that's a good segue to our final speaker today, who's from the farming community, also private sector, which is Minoru. And as Philippe had mentioned, I think he started his discussion around how COVID-19 has really, I guess, presented that opportunity for French Polynesia to, hasten their shift and their work in food systems and food security. And so what started out as, I guess, a health issue, a health challenge, which was the pandemic, quickly morphed into a socioeconomic issue across the world. So borders closed, people were looking to see how they fed themselves, how they were being resilient. And even within the region, we had to look at, we were heavily relying on imports, but how is it that, people could stay well fed and eat healthier? So there was a lot of, people taking backyard farming and so on. So it was really good to hear from Philippe to share that perspective, which I think we can all relate to in some way. So if I may, I will now invite Minoru. So Minoru, you're the last speaker, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I guess essentially we can't really talk about a resilient food system and not talk about the role of non-state actors, and particularly the private sector. And as you've heard, all 3 speakers before you have mentioned the private sector in some way. And of course, this includes farmers as well as businesses. And where is it that they sit in, we talk about private-public partnerships all the time, or people first, public-private partnerships in addressing food systems deficiencies. Can you put this engagement into context, especially given the COVID-19 pandemic and the volcano eruption in Tonga, and where you, particularly as your role as a business person, as a PIFON president, and also as part of the Chamber of Commerce, where you saw your role in that and how that sort of pushes you and the groups that you're involved with to focus more on private sector development for resilience.
Oh, thank you very much, Alicia, for the opportunity, and congratulations to my fellow panelists. I think Michaela and Philippe have touched on a few important points that I was going to talk about. So it's important to note that it's not just isolated incidences or things that we need to address as a region and globally as a planet, but it's things that are common to many of us. And the theme of today's session, our people, our strength, I congratulate the organizers, because it really is about the people. And what COVID has taught us in the last couple of years is really the disruption on production, the anxiety from the eruption of the Hunga Tonga, Hunga Ha'apai, and a 3-month drought last year has really exacerbated the confidence level in our farmers, our fishermen. Everything came to a halt, as we all know. And it's really taught us that we need to look internally as a country, as individual nations, as a region, collectively as well, may I mention, because we're too small to compete amongst ourselves. 70% of our farmers here live in rural areas. They're an important source of supply for our food security for the planet. And I don't think enough attention is given to them to address their needs at the grassroots level. But we have bodies such as Pacific Farmer Organization in the region. It's only a 10-year organization, but we've gone from strength to strength, from 18,000 members in 8 countries to now 14 countries and 90,000+ members that we represent. So they're a very important part of this network that we build and continue to build. And I'm very glad to say that now we're getting recognized at the regional level, having a seat along with PIPSO. And thank you to PIPSO and SPC for the support in recognizing the voices of our farmers at these regional forums, because I think to build change, sustainable change for all of us, we need to work together. Partnerships need to include farmers, businesses, governments, donor agencies. They need to come and collaborate, but listen to the voices of our farmers and fishermen in order to develop policies and systems to address some of the challenges that we all face. Last year, in particular for us, our exports was down 62%, the worst it's ever been, and that's because of COVID, the eruption, and the drought. I'd like to recall 3 important messages from our King, His Majesty Tupo the Sixth, and numerous statements to Parliament pre-COVID and during COVID, which relates to what we're talking about today. Firstly, he talked about the need to help to address the health of his people. He talked about food. Secondly, the education, and thirdly, economic development. In terms of health, we all know the high incidences of NCDs in the region. 60% on average of our food that we consume is imported and mostly processed and unhealthy options. Yet we live in paradise. We should be addressing and supporting our local industries, our local farmers and fishermen, to create employment, but also healthy opportunities and choices for us. In Tonga, we all think, a lot of our people here think that if we consume a can of Coke, it's better for you. It's a status thing but they don't realize that a coconut is actually healthier, or water is healthier. So education plays an important role, and education really should start from the bottom up, from our producers, whether they're fishermen or farmers, through to the consumers, through the schools. And I think there's a great opportunity, an untapped opportunity in most of our Pacific Island countries to connect farmers to our school food policy and systems. We have canteens that we bring in, allow imported foods that our children consume, which adds to the health issue and the high bill that we have in terms of a health bill. In terms of development, the high cost of production and freight costs because of the war and the COVID, that hasn't come down. That's more than doubled here in Tonga's case. So again, we need to support local industries, and we're losing a lot of our youth and people to seasonal worker scheme in Australia and New Zealand. We can't stop them, but we need to put policies and strategies in place to promote and build capacity for those who are left behind, to support businesses and the primary industries in which we all operate. We need to reduce imports by, again, realizing the potential of our farm organizations and our businesses locally. Majority of our employment here in Tonga are from the private sector, so we're an important engine of support for the government in terms of a tax bill. So the more we do to build capacity, technical and infrastructure support, the better it is for the country as a whole. The war in Ukraine, now we're seeing wheat flour in Tonga double in price. So Philippe, thank you for promoting breadfruit flour, cassava flour. I spoke to one of our local retailers here and bakery, a Chinese guy. He uses 50% cassava flour in all his baking. And he ordered 8 containers of flour from Singapore, originated from China. We had to go all the way from China. Okay, economies of scale. But what can we do to do a substitute, tax those that are imported higher, support local industries? So I think there's room there for us to improve some of the policies and strategies, but we need to listen to the people, the doers, those who are well established, those who are actually doing serious work to have an impact, a positive impact on the economy and the country as a whole. We need to break down barriers for regional, inter-regional trade, something I've spoken about many years. And very little is done. And I think we need political will from our leaders at the PIFs and seek good advice from the right people in order to make informed decisions to support that. We're too small, I said, as a region to be competing. Renewable energy is a big one. Desalination for irrigation to support our farmers. We're in the middle of El Nino now. A drought is in effect in Tonga. And today, my water tank was almost finished, and I have 40,000 litre tank. Luckily, I have another 270,000 litres of water, rainwater, going through a UV filtration system. I'm now supporting other families getting water for them. So that's something that we've always talked about before, but fell on deaf ears. And now we're in a situation, it's constant now, it's regular, 2 years in a row now. We need to really think about our approach to climate change, food security, and the health of our people. I think I'll leave it there for now, but you know, I like to reiterate that the strength of the farm organizations in the region, that is a model and an approach that we should take and build on. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you, Minoru. Wow, what an end to the four speakers. You know, that was a really touching intervention, and I think you've really summarized in a great way, you know, all the content that's come through from Dora, from Michaela, and Philippe as well. So really reinforcing and you know, revalidating in a way the health focus, the need for you know, collaboration across the governments, you know, so it's not just when we're looking at building resilience in food systems, it's not just agriculture and fisheries, but there's a role for the health departments, for the education ministry, the whole conversation around, you know, raising awareness, food literacy, that's a whole conversation in itself. And of course, the whole focus around intra-regional trade, which is you have raised, but also that's come through from Philippe in terms of the product development and how is it that we can leverage off already some of the work that's taking place in the region. So really, thank you for those reflections. I think you've really captured quite well also the multi-stakeholder engagement and the need for us to be having more conversations, not just more conversations, but really trying to now put a lot more effort and investments and to have some actions tagged to some of these discussions that we're having. So whether it's coming from government, such from Philippe's side, for example, from businesses like yourself, from academia, and from the science based organizations as well as the community. And I think that really shows the nature in which we're trying to address the problem is it involves a broader intervention from policymakers to scientists, academia and community and businesses. So before opening up the floor for questions, I think I just wanted to say thank you again to all the panelists and really now invite the floor for any questions and comments. And I think I'm supposed to go to the chat to read out some questions. Okay, Luke, you might have to direct me. I think I've got one question here. Okay, there's one in the question and answer section. So I'll read this out. And I think this is perhaps more tailored for Philippe to answer, I think. So if I may, I'll read it out. It's from someone who's got the initial TR. So it says, in the heart of climate and ecological crisis that we are enduring in the Pacific, and when looking at food security and global economic trade in the region, where does the organic farming fit in the lens of regenerative development that protects the soil, body health and rights? So if I may invite Philippe to respond to that one.
Oui, merci pour cette question. Alors, on se place agriculture biologique. En Polynésie française, l'agriculture biologique est devenue progressivement une priorité gouvernementale parce qu'il y a également une prise de conscience sur l'impact de l'agriculture et des pesticides chimiques, notamment. Il y a deux, trois sujets techniques autour de l'agriculture biologique. Celui que l'on connaît le plus, c'est celui autour des pesticides chimiques. On a maintenant à peu près bien identifié le danger que ça peut représenter pour la santé, même à des doses considérées comme faibles. ou en dessous des limites maximales de résidus. Danger pour les agriculteurs d'abord, mais pour les consommateurs ensuite. Après, trop d'engrais chimiques, danger pour les sols. Il y a très nettement de danger pour les sols, danger pour la biodiversité, qui est énorme. Donc là aussi, il faut se rendre à l'évidence, on ne peut pas continuer dans cette même direction. Donc, le gouvernement s'est donné pour objectif en 10 ans de passer à 25% de produits d'origine biologique. Et là aussi, c'est un énorme défi parce qu'il ne s'agit pas de le décréter. Ce sont les agriculteurs qui doivent changer leurs pratiques. Le gouvernement, il doit simplement donner un cap, aider, bien sûr, et puis il faut continuer à nourrir les populations, il faut continuer également à permettre l'activité économique. Donc on ne peut pas du jour au lendemain interdire l'importation, par exemple, ou les usages de pesticides si on n'a rien pour les remplacer dans les pratiques. Donc c'est extrêmement compliqué. Très très peu de pays aujourd'hui ont interdit le glyphosate parce que finalement, qu'est-ce qui se passerait en Polynésie? On réfléchit, mais on ne pourra plus produire des fruits et légumes. Il y aura une baisse de production et on va importer des fruits et légumes de Nouvelle-Zélande qui utilisent le glyphosate. Donc, où est l'intérêt finalement? Donc, ça peut être que des mesures coordonnées à l'échelle mondiale. On voit encore l'énorme complexité du sujet. Nous, en Polynésie, on a pris la direction. Voilà, on favorise l'aide, mais c'est très compliqué parce qu'il faut aussi certifier les producteurs. L'agriculture biologique, c'est aussi une relation de confiance entre le producteur et le consommateur garantie par les pouvoirs publics. Donc c'est complexe. Voilà, on a quelques éléments de réponse.
Thank you so much for that, Philippe. I think that has really answered, I think, that TR's question. Sorry, I'm just using your abbreviations in your question. I think this one I will address. I think I've just got time for 2 more questions. I think one I'll share to Michaela and Minoru. One of the questions is from the Fiji Hub. What are some of the crucial steps that is needed to enhance agri-food systems, value chains, and reduce food wastage? So maybe if I can get both Michaela and Minoru to answer that, and then I'll pose one question to Dora to end.
Does Minoru want to go first?
Okay, thank you, Michaela. Look, we need technical support. I mentioned it earlier. Firstly, what in Tonga's case, what's missing here is the technical assistance from food scientists, agronomists to support the production. In terms of waste, we're currently running a trial. I air freighted a machine from Norway, all the way from Norway, and it's going to cost us by the end of it over 100,000. But this is all investment by private sector to try and have zero waste with the produce that we have from our smallholder farmers that come through our packing facility, and then turning that into potentially different things. If we scale up it with the feasibility study is good, then it means that we can scale up. But means we can have flour for food security, for different things, and of high value, and cassava being a low commodity, which also address some of the food, baking and all that. But also livestock feed. We import a lot of livestock feed from New Zealand, and the cost last year when we started this feasibility study was 42 per anga, or about just less than $20 per bag, 25 kg. This year it's $55 to $57 a bag. And even at that point, when we did the feasibility startup last year, we thought it would be viable. And the food technician that came from New Zealand thought that it would be a much higher quality food source for our livestock. And we're starting with pigs. So the key point for us is having the technical support and investment from donor agencies to come in, do the due diligence. If you think it's something that's viable and it's good for the country, then why not? So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. That's just one example of agribusiness. But when you're doing all that, also I think connect it to as many avenues as you can, like your domestic market, in niche exports only if there's an opportunity. But our focus here is import substitution and for the domestic market, and also agritourism. So connecting with local partners. We're building the facility here to actually as an add-on or a byproduct of what we're doing with the packhouse and factory, and connect with our handicraft people and farmers. That's something that's going to come in the near future, hopefully. Thank you.
Thanks, Minora. Michaela?
Yeah, so thank you, Minora. I think you've touched on quite a lot of things that are really important. I think investment is really important, but investment in the right technologies, and sometimes that requires a bit of experimentation and an adaptation of those technologies to make sure that they're appropriate, and more importantly, that they're affordable, because you can have the best technology that will work in a value chain, but if it's not affordable, it's never going to be adopted and used by people. So I think it's really doing some really careful systems thinking and systems analysis across the value chain to see where the opportunities are, whether it's on farm or across through into processing, and how some of those loops can be created back. So when you're doing your processing, can that waste then be used back on farm or be used in aquaculture or some other, when you're talking about reduction in waste, can it be used in some other part of the process? Food waste is very challenging, especially in island nations where shifting products, and I mean, even in Australia, food waste is a huge issue. I mean, as soon as you have to start to shift product, it becomes incredibly difficult. So trying to think of ways where product can be used locally as much as possible, or where processing can occur locally, I think is one of the key areas of innovation that needs to be looked at in the value chains. And there's no easy solution for this, but I think it's starting to think about where the opportunities are and starting to talk to people. So it's really that dialogue, that ongoing dialogue between people in the value chain as to what the opportunities are, from farm all the way to market. I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Michaela. Okay, I've been issued a warning that we should be wrapping up soon. So if I may, I'll just quickly pose one question that's come from George to Dora, and it's, how can we combat resilience in terms of climate change, and I'll add food systems to that, in those vulnerable communities in the Pacific? And I guess, Dora, you'd probably respond more in relation to Vanuatu, so it'd be great to hear a response based on that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'll probably just use one of the key findings from my data was, the idea, the climate resilient in terms of food security. And I think the limitations of definitions of words can be an issue. Increased production, food resilience, and then we often lack the nutrition component. But I'll just go to the question. I think stepping back to my chapter on historical legacy, how we can learn from the past is that previously the way the colonial administration structured is understanding how different islands, or what could grow well in different islands. And I understand the climate, impact change. It has influence on food, where food grows. But I think one idea that comes out is the idea of zoning. Zoning areas can influence and have a beneficial impact across a lot of issues that we currently face in Vanuatu. And one being, zoning can help with some kind of management, sustainability, management of resource. So if you know where certain species of fish or products grow, then that place needs to be managed. But it also gives the right to the government to manage areas that often they have better production sites, but due to the usual land disputes and community fairness, I think that's where it comes under institutional, like the enabling environment for also business business to operate sustainably in communities. And I think it may not directly too, but I think the system needs to be improved so that the resources are managed properly and identified where areas where the investment could be used and not just it could be better, have better impact. So I think in terms of resilience, zoning of areas could be one thing that could be considered in the government as an enabling environment for food security, sustainable environmental sustainability, and also different actors in the food space to use certain areas for food production. I hope I've answered that question.
Thank you for that, Dora. And George, I hope that answered your question. In fact, we've got quite a lot of questions online, but I'm afraid we won't be able to answer them all. I'll talk to Tia and Luke and try and figure out how we can collate all these questions, get the panelists to respond, and how we can share this more widely. I'm not quite sure on what platform, but that's for us to work at and figure out, and we'll communicate that, I guess, through the PRM newsletter or something. But again, really to say thank you to Philippe, thank you to Michaela, thank you, Dora, and thank you, Minoru, for your interventions today. I've really, really enjoyed the session today, and I hope all of you that have tuned in this afternoon have walked away a bit more informed or have learned something from the conversations today. But more importantly, I've hoped you've walked away and become a keen advocate on food systems transformation and resilience. I wish you all a good afternoon. Ni samode and au revoir. Goodbye. Thank you.